The wind carried the scent of smoke and cold iron across the plains that night, a reminder of fires once lit for warmth and battles once fought for pride. The man standing beside the dying campfire had seen both kinds. His face bore the quiet weight of years that refused to fade, the kind that no sleep could soften. His rifle leaned against a stump, his coat torn at the shoulder, and his eyes, gray as winter water, watched the figure tied near the rocks. The prisoner hadn't moved in hours, though the faint rise and fall of her chest proved she was still alive. The ropes around her wrists looked rough, but his hesitation while binding them had been even rougher. He had fought in the war and seen many things, but this silence between a weary soldier and a captured Apache woman, felt heavier than any battlefield he'd crossed. He had spent most of his adult life among men, marching, surviving, burying, and drinking away ghosts that never left him alone. Out here, surrounded by the quiet desert, those ghosts seemed to whisper again. They came with the wind, calling him by the name he hadn't heard since the war ended. He stirred the fire with a stick, trying to drive the thoughts away, but the woman's stillness brought them back stronger. The glow painted her cheekbones in red and gold, and something in him twisted. She was no ordinary captive. Her posture held defiance even in exhaustion. Her gaze, when she opened her eyes earlier, hadn't shown fear, only disgust and pity, the kind that makes a man question which side of the fight he belonged to. He had been sent west to hunt raiding parties, but no one told him the mission would turn into this, alone in the desert. With a wounded Apache woman he couldn't hand over without feeling like a villain. He had shot her brother in the fight near the canyon. She'd drawn a knife, and he'd wrestled it from her hands. But once the smoke cleared, once the others rode off with the spoils and he stayed behind to finish the job, something inside him broke. He couldn't kill her. Not after seeing the way she knelt beside her fallen kin, whispering words in a tongue he didn't understand. He'd tied her instead, planning to take her to the fort, but each hour that passed made him less certain of that plan. When the night deepened and the cold bit harder, he removed his coat and laid it over her shoulders. She didn't thank him, didn't even glance his way, just stared at the fire with eyes that held storms. He told himself it was duty. Keeping her alive meant keeping a prisoner valuable to command, but deep down he knew better. He hadn't touched kindness in years. Not since the war, not since his wife's letter came with the word buried written under a child's name he never met. From that day he'd slept on dirt and stone, beside rifles and canteens, never beside another living soul. The woman shivered once, and he caught himself whispering, "I haven't slept beside a woman since the war." The words slipped out before he knew he'd spoken. Her head turned slightly, the ropes creaking with her movement. For the first time she looked at him, not with hate but confusion. Maybe even curiosity. He regretted saying it, but the truth had been waiting too long inside him. It wasn't about desire. It was about distance, about a man who'd forgotten what warmth meant. "You'll freeze if you keep pretending pride is enough," he muttered. She didn't reply. Her lips moved, though, forming words in her own language. Soft, rhythmic, like a prayer or a curse. He didn't know which. He reached into his saddlebag, took out a piece of jerky and placed it near her. She refused it. That made him respect her even more. Pride like that had kept men alive in war, and maybe it was what kept her alive now. Hours passed before the silence broke again. She spoke in broken English, her accent sharp but steady. "Why not kill me?" she asked. He froze. The question cut through the cold like a blade. He didn't answer at first, just stared at the dying fire. Finally, he said, "Because killing stopped feeling like victory a long time ago." Her eyes studied him, searching for deceit. He could feel the weight of her stare, could sense the judgment behind it. She saw the tremor in his hand, the exhaustion in his face. Whatever she found in his silence made her turn away again, muttering something that sounded almost like pity. When dawn began to crawl over the horizon, painting the sand in pale pink, he realized how deep the night had gone. His horse shifted restlessly. The woman hadn't slept. Neither had he. She had managed to loosen one of the knots around her wrist, and though she hadn't tried to escape, he noticed. Maybe she wanted him to. Maybe she wanted him to see what choice he'd make next. He walked to the stream nearby, filled a canteen and splashed water over his face. The reflection that stared back at him looked older than he remembered. Years of smoke and gunfire had carved trenches into his skin. He wondered what he looked like through her eyes. A killer, a coward, or just another lost soul in a land filled with them. When he returned, she was humming something under her breath, a tune so haunting it made the birds stop singing. It wasn't a war song, he could tell. It was older, sadder. He sat across from her, close enough to feel the rhythm of her breath. "That song," he said quietly. "What does it mean?" She looked at him and replied, "It means I remember." He didn't ask what she remembered. He already knew the feeling. The war had taught him that memory could be more dangerous than bullets. It sneaks up when the guns are quiet, when there's no one left to blame but yourself. The wind rose again, swirling dust around them. He stood up and started untying her ankles. She tensed, expecting something else, but he simply said, "You can't walk far with rope burns. I'll take you to the fort tomorrow." She glared at him. "You bring me there, I die." The words were flat, certain. He met her gaze and said, "Maybe." Her defiance burned brighter than the morning sun. "Then why not do it now?" she challenged. He tightened his jaw and looked away. "Because I don't want another ghost following me." The sound of distant horses interrupted them. He froze. The echoes carried over the hills, maybe a patrol, maybe raiders. Either way, danger was near. The Apache woman's eyes widened. "My people," she whispered. "Or yours," he replied, reaching for his rifle. For a moment, they just stared at each other, neither trusting, neither certain what came next. Her bonds were half cut, his rifle half raised, and between them the fire crackled low, throwing sparks into the cold air. The noise of hooves grew louder, closer, and he realized there wasn't time to choose. He could untie her completely and take his chances with her tribe, or keep her bound and face whatever his own men might think when they found him guarding an Apache captive alone in the wilderness. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low and sharp. "You decide quick, soldier. Who do you belong to now?" The question hit harder than any bullet. He didn't know the answer, not anymore. The war had ended years ago, but the battlefield had never left him. And as the sound of riders closed in, dust clouds rising against the pale dawn, he understood one thing clearly. Whatever choice he made next would define whether he lived as a soldier or as a man finally ready to lay his ghost to rest. The fire hissed as the wind picked up, blowing ash across the sand. He took one step toward her, knife in hand, not to threaten but to finish cutting the rope. She watched him closely, her breathing tense, her eyes locked on his face. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a horn sounded, echoing through the canyon. He turned his head toward the sound, heart pounding, unsure if it meant rescue or death. When he looked back at her, she whispered one word that he didn't understand, but it carried the weight of destiny. The moment hung between them, fragile as smoke. Then the hoofbeats thundered closer, and everything that had been silent for years was about to break. The sound of hooves rolled through the valley like distant thunder, stirring dust and fear together in the soldier's chest. He could not tell how many riders there were, only that they were moving fast and closing in from the east. The Apache woman's eyes stayed on him, steady and unblinking. She didn't flinch, didn't beg. There was pride in her stillness, the kind only born from people who have already faced death too many times. He hesitated with the knife still in his hand, torn between reason and instinct. If he set her free and they were her people, they might spare her and kill him. If he kept her bound and it turned out to be the army patrol, she'd hang before nightfall. And maybe he would too for disobeying orders. He bent down and sliced through the last of the rope. She blinked in surprise, rubbing her wrists as the blood returned to them. "You're free," he said quietly, keeping his voice calm. "If those are your people, run to them. But if they're mine, you better hide." For the first time, she didn't look at him with anger. "You'll die if they find you with me," she said softly. "Maybe," he answered, "but dying with a little decency left beats living as a coward." He helped her to her feet. She was weak from exhaustion, but she stood tall. Together, they moved behind a cluster of rocks as the riders came into view across the open plain. Through the haze, he saw blue coats glinting in the sun. Soldiers. His soldiers. The sight should have brought relief, but instead it brought dread. He knew what they would think. A white soldier alone with an Apache woman, no command post in sight, no report filed. They'd call him deserter, maybe traitor. He'd seen men shot for less during the war. The woman crouched beside him, her breath steady. "You're afraid," she said. "Of them," he admitted. "More than of me." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Then we are the same," she whispered. The patrol came closer, dust trailing behind their horses. He could make out the captain's voice barking orders. "Fan out! Check the ridge!" The soldier grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her deeper into the shadows of the rocks. He couldn't let them see her. Not now. Not until he figured out what to do. He pressed a finger to his lips. She nodded and crouched lower. The hoofbeats passed near, then faded toward the west. When the sound disappeared, he exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. He looked over at her. Her expression had changed. She wasn't just a captive anymore. She was a witness to his fear, his hesitation, his refusal to do what every other soldier would have done. "Why you not go with them?" she asked, pointing in the direction the patrol had gone. "Because I'm not sure they're my kind anymore," he said quietly. She tilted her head, studying him. "Then who are you?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know. Ever since the war, every uniform he wore felt heavier. Back then, he fought for the Union, for freedom, or so they said. But the war had turned good men into monsters, and monsters into ghosts. When it ended, he was left standing over graves that had no names. He'd signed on for the frontier duty because there was nowhere else to go, and no one left to wait for him. The army promised food, a horse, and something close to purpose, but all it ever gave was dust and death. They stayed hidden until the sun was high, the heat pressing down like punishment. He gave her water and watched as she drank carefully, her eyes darting between him and the horizon. "You killed my brother," she said suddenly, her voice flat but not cruel. He nodded slowly. "I know." She studied him, waiting for him to defend himself, to explain. He didn't. "He was brave," he said instead. "Too brave." For a long time she said nothing. Then quietly she replied, "He died fighting for his home." "What did you fight for?" The question sank into him like a bullet. He'd been asked that before, by comrades in the trenches, by preachers after the battles, but never by someone whose eyes made him feel like he was standing trial before the earth itself. "I fought because I was told to," he said, "and because it was the only thing I knew how to do." She turned her gaze toward the mountains. "That is a poor reason to kill." Her words stung because they were true. He had long stopped pretending otherwise. The war had taught him how to obey, not how to live. Each order carried blood behind it, and every victory cost a piece of what made him human. Somewhere between Virginia and Arizona, he'd lost whatever soul he once had. As the day dragged on, they found shelter under a dead tree near a dry riverbed. He gathered some brush for fire, and she watched him in silence, the way one studies a dangerous animal. When he handed her food again, she took it this time. "You think your people good," she said between bites, "but you steal land, kill women, burn homes. My people fight back and you call us savage." He didn't argue. "Maybe we are," he said. "Maybe both of us are." Her gaze softened a little. "You speak like man who lost too much." He gave a faint nod. "I lost everything that mattered before I even knew how to keep it." That night, as darkness crept over the desert, he sat near the fire, polishing his rifle out of habit. The woman lay near the edge of the glow, her eyes half closed. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled. It reminded him of the nights in Tennessee when the war had just ended. He'd walked for days through burned-out towns, hearing mothers cry for sons who'd never come home. He remembered the letter that reached him in a camp near the river, the one that said his wife had died giving birth. He'd never even seen the child. That was the day he stopped believing in mercy. The Apache woman's voice cut through his thoughts. "You have ghosts," she said quietly. He nodded. "Too many." She rolled to her side, facing him. "My people talk to our dead in dreams. Yours?" "Mine only visit when I close my eyes," he said. "So I stopped sleeping." She looked at him for a long while before speaking again. "You could find peace if you stop fighting yourself." He gave a bitter laugh. "Peace isn't made for men like me." The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of rain. A storm was building in the west. The air felt thick, charged with something neither of them could name. He glanced at her again. "You have a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said one softly. It sounded like the word for dawn. He repeated it under his breath, feeling strange saying it aloud as if it carried power. "And you?" she asked. He gave his name quietly, though it felt foreign, leaving his lips. No one had spoken it kindly in years. Thunder rolled in the distance. He checked the sky. "We'll need shelter soon," he said. She nodded, standing slowly. Her movements were graceful despite her injuries. "There is cave near the ridge," she said. "My people use it when storms come." He hesitated but followed her lead. Trust wasn't easy, but he had nothing left to lose by trying. They reached the cave as lightning split the sky open. Inside, the air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of smoke from fires long gone. He could tell her people had been there not long ago. She gathered dry moss and twigs, making a small fire from flint she carried hidden in her belt. Watching her, he realized she was far stronger than she let on. She noticed his stare. "You think I am weak because I was tied?" she asked. "No," he said. "I think you were waiting for the right time." She didn't deny it. Her eyes flicked to the rifle by his side. "You would not shoot me now," she said. "No," he answered, "I wouldn't." "Then why still carry gun?" "Because I don't know how to be without it." Rain began to pour outside, heavy and cold. The sound filled the cave like 1,000 drummers. He leaned against the wall, staring into the fire. She sat across from him, her face lit by the flames. For a moment, they were just two souls caught between wars, the one outside and the one still raging inside them. "You ever think about going home?" he asked. She tilted her head. "This is my home," she said simply. He nodded slowly. "Mine was taken," he whispered. "Burned down long ago." The storm grew louder, the wind howling through the narrow entrance. He felt the ground tremble slightly, as if the earth itself wanted to speak. The woman's eyes met his again, calm and fearless. "The riders today," she said suddenly. "They will come back. Maybe tomorrow, maybe more of them." He knew she was right. The patrol would report movement near the canyon. They'd return in greater numbers, hunting whoever they thought was hiding there. If they found her, she'd be killed. If they found him with her, he'd hang beside her. She leaned closer to the fire. "When they come, you must choose," she said quietly. "Your people or your heart." The rain hissed louder on the rocks. He felt the words settle deep inside, heavy and unshakable. Somewhere far away, lightning flashed again, lighting up the mouth of the cave for a brief second. In that flash, he saw two shapes standing on the ridge, too tall to be rocks, too still to be trees. Someone was out there watching them through the storm. He reached for his rifle slowly, eyes never leaving the entrance. The woman turned toward the sound too, her hand instinctively moving to the knife strap to her leg. The fire crackled low, shadows dancing on the walls, and in that tense silence, broken only by thunder and rain, he realized the night was far from over. The figures outside the cave stayed motionless against the storm's flashes. The soldier held his breath, rifle tight in his hands as the Apache woman crouched low, her hand on her knife. The fire between them flickered weakly, its glow bouncing off the damp cave walls. When the thunder rolled again, the shapes were gone, swallowed by the dark. He wasn't sure if they'd left or were circling around. The wind carried no voices, but the feeling of being watched clung to the air like smoke. He whispered, "Could they be your people?" She didn't answer right away. "Maybe," she said finally. "Or maybe soldiers. Both hunt in storms, one for survival, one for orders." Her tone carried neither hope nor fear, only a deep weariness. She moved toward the cave mouth quietly, her feet silent on the stone. He wanted to stop her, but he didn't. She peered into the rain, then returned. "They left," she said. "But they will come again," he nodded. His grip on the rifle loosened slightly, but his heart didn't. Every shadow outside felt alive, every echo of thunder a threat. He'd lived through ambushes before, seen men fall asleep with their eyes open, never to wake. The storm might have chased their watchers away for now, but it also hid tracks, washed away trails, made everyone blind. When the rain eased, they stepped out under a gray dawn. The air smelled of wet sage and smoke from distant fires. She pointed west toward a line of bluffs. "There," she said. "Canyon runs through. Safer to travel when sun high." He hesitated. "And if your people find us?" She looked at him steadily. "Then I speak for you. Maybe they listen." They walked in silence for a long while, their boots and bare feet sinking into the softened earth. The soldier scanned the horizon often, trained by habit to expect danger where quiet looked harmless. The woman's stride was light but steady, her eyes always searching the ground. She moved like she belonged to the land, while he looked like a man just passing through a place that had already judged him. After a few miles, they came across the ruins of an old trading post, wood splintered, roof gone, only a stone chimney still standing. He stopped, staring at it. "Used to be a supply station here," he murmured. "Burned during the raids last winter." She walked through the wreckage, her fingers brushing the charred wood. "White men built fast," she said. "But not strong," he almost smiled. "You're not wrong." Inside the ruins, he found a half-buried tin box and pried it open with his knife. Inside were a few rusted bullets, a broken compass, and a piece of cloth. He turned the cloth over. It was a child's handkerchief embroidered with small, uneven letters. His throat tightened. He tucked it away before she could ask. They decided to rest in the shade of the chimney. The soldier's mind drifted back to the sound of the riders, wondering if they'd found tracks. He imagined his old captain's voice echoing commands, cold, sharp, absolute. The captain had been a good man once, before the frontier hardened him. Now he shot first and justified later. If the patrol returned, there'd be no trial. Just another grave. The woman noticed his silence. "You think too much," she said quietly. "Thinking keeps me alive," he replied. She shook her head. "No, moving does." By midday they continued west, the sun harsh on their backs. The land grew rougher, jagged rocks, dry shrubs, and narrow gullies that forced them to move single file. He watched her ahead of him, steady and alert. She didn't tire easily, though the wound on her leg slowed her now and then. When she stumbled once, he caught her arm. She pulled away, glaring at him. "I can walk." "I know," he said softly, "but you don't have to prove it every step." That night they camped in a hollow near a stream. He built a small fire while she cleaned her knife. The crackling flames made her features sharper, the shadows deeper. "You fought in your war," she said. "You killed your own kind," he nodded. "Brother against brother. No one remembers why after a while. And still you fight again," she said. "Why?" He stared into the fire. "Because peace never seems to find me." She studied him for a long moment before saying, "You carry pain like weapon. Heavy. You let it rule you." He didn't answer. Her words hit too close. The firelight caught the edge of her knife as she turned it in her hand, and for a second he thought of how easily she could have ended him that first night. But she hadn't, and that unsettled him more than anything. As the stars emerged, she began humming again, the same melody she had sung before. It filled the night with something ancient, something that didn't belong to war or vengeance. He listened in silence, feeling the weight in his chest loosen if only slightly. When the song ended, she whispered, "It is Song of Home." He almost asked her to teach it, but a noise from the distance cut through the quiet, a low rumble of hooves. He jumped to his feet, grabbing his rifle. She stood beside him instantly, her expression sharp. They crouched low, eyes fixed on the ridge. Through the moonlight, he saw them. 5 riders, not soldiers, not Apache either. They wore mixed clothes, buckskin, old cavalry coats, bandanas, outlaws. He recognized the kind, men who lived by robbing whoever crossed their path. The riders stopped near the stream, their voices rough and drunken. He counted the rifles. "We can't stay," he whispered. "They'll see the fire." She nodded, and together they kicked dirt over the flames. The night swallowed the light, leaving them in cold darkness. They crept behind a boulder, hearts thudding. One of the riders dismounted and came closer, scanning the ground. The soldier held his breath. The man bent down, touching the earth where the fire had been. "Still warm," he called out. The soldier raised his rifle slowly, lining up the sights. The woman caught his wrist, shaking her head. "Too many," she mouthed. He hesitated. She was right. They'd never outrun 5 horses. The rider turned toward the rocks, squinting into the dark. "Come out, whoever you are," he shouted. "Ain't looking for trouble unless you got something worth taking." The soldier said nothing. The man waited, then spat and turned back to his horse. "No one here," he muttered. They watched as the group rode off toward the ridge, laughter echoing behind them. When the sound faded, he exhaled shakily. The woman looked at him. "They will come again," she said. "They always come again." He nodded. "I know their kind. War didn't end them. It just gave them more land to steal." The next morning they followed the stream deeper into the canyon. The cliffs rose high on both sides, cutting off the wind. He recognized the terrain from old maps. It led toward the reservation boundary. The thought made him uneasy. Soldiers patrolled those edges often, and Apache bands moved nearby. A wrong turn could mean walking into either side's rifles. As they walked, she spoke softly. "You could leave. Go back to your people. No one would stop you." He shook his head. "They'd call me a deserter. Maybe hang me for letting you go. Then why stay?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Because I'm tired of watching good people die for nothing." She looked at him strangely, as if seeing something she hadn't before. "You talk like man with no home but too much heart." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's true." They reached a narrow pass where the rocks formed a natural arch. She stopped suddenly, crouching low. "Tracks," she whispered. He knelt beside her. The prints were fresh, bare feet mixed with moccasins. "Your people?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Warband, small, maybe scouts." Her face tightened. "If they find you with me, they kill you." He thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe they'll listen if you tell them what happened." She looked away. They do not forgive easily. Before they could decide, a voice called out in Apache from the ridge above. She tensed. He raised his rifle but didn't aim. 3 figures appeared, bows drawn, faces painted for war. One of them shouted again, eyes fixed on her. She replied quickly in her language, her tone calm but firm. The men hesitated. One lowered his bow slightly. The soldier stayed still, watching the exchange he couldn't understand. After a few tense minutes, the men motioned for her to climb up the path. She turned to him. "They want me to come, alone." "And me?" he asked. "They don't want you." He nodded slowly. "I figured." She looked at him for a moment longer, her eyes unreadable. "If I do not come back, go east. Follow river. And if I wait?" he asked. She didn't reply, just turned and began to climb. He watched her until she disappeared over the ridge. Then the canyon was silent again. He sat by the stream, his thoughts turning heavy. Every instinct told him to leave, to vanish before the war band returned. But something in him couldn't move. Not yet. He owed her that much. The sun climbed higher, burning the air dry. Hours passed. No sign of her. Then faintly he heard shouting from the ridge, angry voices. He stood gripping his rifle. A figure stumbled into view. It was her, running down the slope, blood on her arm. Behind her came the war band, arrows drawn, yelling words he didn't need to understand. He raised his rifle, heart hammering. The first arrow struck near his feet. He fired once, the shot cracking through the canyon. She reached him, gasping. "They think you kill their kin." "Did I?" he asked, breathless. "No," she said. "But they won't listen." He pulled her behind the rocks as more arrows flew. Dust exploded around them, the air thick with heat and fear. The canyon echoed with war cries and gunfire. He loaded another round, his hand steady but his mind racing. This wasn't a battle between enemies anymore. It was a fight between what he'd been and what he might still become. As the echoes died for a moment, he looked at her, her face streaked with blood and determination. "If we make it out of this," he said quietly, "you tell me what that song means." She met his gaze and nodded once, her breath ragged but her spirit unbroken. Then the shouting grew louder again, and the storm of violence came roaring back. The gunfire echoed through the canyon, bouncing between the stone walls until it sounded like an army. The soldier ducked behind a jagged boulder, breathing hard, his rifle pressed tight against his shoulder. The Apache woman crouched beside him, clutching her bleeding arm, her dark eyes burning with anger and fear. Dust and fragments of rock showered around them as arrows thudded into the ground. He reloaded quickly, the sound of metal sliding against metal lost in the chaos. The war cries rose again, sharp and wild, cutting through the air like the screams of ghosts. "They won't stop," she said through gritted teeth. "They believe you killed their brother." He glanced at her, sweat streaking the dirt on his face. "You told them I didn't." "They don't care," she snapped. "They only see the gun in your hands." He peeked around the edge of the rock. 3 of them were advancing down the ridge, moving fast and low. He fired once, sending one scrambling for cover. He didn't want to kill them, but he couldn't let them reach her either. She picked up his revolver and aimed with steady hands, her expression unreadable. The 2 of them, hunter and hunted, were now bound by survival more than trust. The canyon filled with smoke as another shot rang out. A bullet chipped the rock inches from his head. He flinched, then returned fire, striking the ground near the attackers. The noise made the horses tethered nearby scream and pull at their reins. He knew if they didn't move soon, they'd be surrounded. He turned to her. "We need to get out of here." She nodded, her breathing quick and shallow. "There's a narrow trail behind that ridge," she said. "It leads up to a hidden pass. If we reach it, they'll lose us." He didn't hesitate. They crawled from cover to cover, moving when the wind covered their noise. The canyon walls seemed to close in around them. Every step felt heavier than the last. When they reached the start of the trail, she stumbled, clutching her wound. He caught her arm and lifted her, half carrying her up the steep incline. Behind them, the shouts grew louder. One of the pursuers had spotted them. The crack of a rifle followed, and a bullet tore through the air, grazing his shoulder. The pain burned hot, but he kept moving. By the time they reached the top, both were bleeding and breathless. Below, figures moved like shadows through the canyon, searching for a way up. The soldier looked across the plateau ahead, a stretch of open land, rough and exposed. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll find another way around." She looked toward the distant hills. "There's an old camp to the north. My people used it long ago. It's hidden by the cliffs." He nodded. Then we head there. They walked under a burning sky, the wind carrying the dry scent of danger. Every sound, a hawk's cry, a loose pebble, felt like a warning. The soldier's shoulder throbbed with each step, but he ignored it. He'd been wounded before in worse places. What scared him now wasn't the pain, but the thought of failing her, of letting her die for a war that wasn't hers to fight. As the sun sank, they reached the edge of a forested hollow. Smoke curled faintly in the distance, too thin to be a campfire, too steady to be natural. He raised his rifle, scanning the tree line. Someone's ahead. She moved closer, whispering, "Could be them. Could be others." "Either way, we can't turn back," he said. They crept forward, crouched low between the trees. The shadows stretched long and deep. Then he saw them, 3 men, not Apache, but white settlers. Their horses were tied nearby, and a small fire burned beside a wagon. They looked rough, the kind of drifters who lived by taking from whoever was weaker. The soldier motioned for her to stay back. He stepped out slowly, rifle lowered but ready. "Evening," he called out. The men jumped, hands going to their guns. "Who the hell are you?" one barked. "Just a traveler looking for water," the soldier said calmly. The leader, a heavy-set man with a scar across his face, eyed him suspiciously. "You alone?" "No," he replied. "Got someone hurt." The man's grin widened. "Well, ain't that unfortunate? Maybe we can help for a price." The soldier knew that tone. He'd heard it too many times from men who'd traded compassion for greed. He kept his face still. "I'm not looking for trouble." The man took a step closer. "Out here, trouble's all there is." The woman appeared then, silent as a shadow, her knife glinting in the firelight. The men froze when they saw her. One spat. "Apache." The word carried hatred. The scarred man smirked. "So that's your company? You've gone mad, soldier. Bringing a savage through our land?" The soldier's eyes hardened. "She's under my protection." The laughter that followed was bitter and sharp. "Then you'll die with her," the moment snapped. He moved first, faster than thought. The butt of his rifle struck the nearest man's jaw before the others could fire. The woman leapt forward, cutting the strap of a holster before the second could draw his gun. The third aimed, but the soldier fired first. The shot echoed through the hollow and the man fell. The others scattered into the trees, cursing and shouting. The woman grabbed his sleeve. "We must go." "I know," he said, reloading. They ran back into the dark forest, branches tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the men's shouts faded. But the danger didn't. The gunshot would bring others, soldiers, scouts, or worse. They stopped only when the trees thinned and the land opened into rolling hills under a silver moon. Both were exhausted. The soldier dropped to one knee, pressing a hand over his wound. Blood had soaked through his shirt. She tore a strip of fabric from her dress and bound it tightly around his arm. Her hands were steady, her expression fierce. "You saved me," she said quietly. "Now I save you." He looked at her, his breath ragged. "I didn't do it to be saved." She didn't answer, just tied the knot and sat back, watching the horizon. "They'll keep hunting," she said after a while. "Your people mine, men like those. They all think they know who the enemy is." He stared into the night. "Maybe that's why none of us win." The wind rose, carrying the faint sound of hooves again. He stood, jaw tightening. "They're still tracking us," she nodded, eyes sharp. "They know this land better than you. They will cut us off." He glanced toward the cliffs to the north. "Then we make our stand there." "You'll die," she said softly. "Maybe," he replied. "But not running." They reached the cliffs near dawn, the light pale and cold. The land dropped sharply into a wide ravine. From here he could see the faint glint of movement on the trail below. Riders, too many to count. The woman looked at him. "We can hide in the caves," she said. He shook his head. "They'll smoke us out." "Then what?" "We fight." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "My brother fought here once," she said quietly. "He died on this ground." He met her eyes. "Then maybe it's time someone lived on it." They set what little they had, his last few bullets, her knives, the broken revolver, and took positions near the rocks overlooking the ravine. He watched the riders approach, dust rising behind them like a storm. The faces were a mix of soldiers and tribesmen, two worlds colliding in the same fury. He realized there'd be no explaining, no reasoning. To them, he was a traitor, and she was the enemy. As the first wave neared, he felt her hand brush his. It wasn't fear. It was acknowledgement, a silent bond between two people who'd lost everything but the will to stand. "If we die," she said, "the spirits will remember." He nodded slowly. If we live, I'll make sure the world does too. The riders spread out, forming a line. A voice shouted orders, echoing across the canyon. He raised his rifle, eyes steady. The woman crouched beside him, her knife drawn. The air felt heavy, charged with the kind of stillness that comes before thunder. The first gunshot broke it, then another. Bullets tore through the dust, arrows followed, and the world exploded into chaos. The soldier fired until his hands shook, the rifle hot against his skin. She moved beside him with the precision of a dancer, every strike swift and sure. They fought not for victory, but for meaning, for the simple truth that neither would bow again. As the smoke thickened and the sun climbed higher, he felt time slow. Every heartbeat thundered in his ears. Somewhere below, a rider fell. Another charged forward. The woman cried out, clutching her side, but stayed upright. He turned toward her, shouting her name. She met his eyes, her face streaked with blood and dust. "Don't stop," she whispered. Not yet. The enemy drew closer, their shouts rising like the roar of a storm. He fired again, each shot feeling heavier than the last. His vision blurred, his strength fading, but his resolve stayed. The cliffs shook with the force of battle, the ground trembling beneath them. Then came a sound that froze him. A horn's call, distant but growing louder. It wasn't Apache. It wasn't raiders. It was the army, reinforcements. He looked down at her, breathless. "They're coming," he said. "For you or for me?" she asked. He didn't know the answer. All he knew was that the next few moments would decide everything. Who lived, who was remembered, and whether either of them could ever find peace again. The wind rose, carrying the cries of the living and the dying alike. He chambered his last round, set his jaw, and turned toward the sound of the approaching riders. The world around him narrowed to one heartbeat, one breath, one choice. And as the first soldier appeared through the smoke, rifle raised, he took aim, ready for whatever fate had waited all these years to find him. The soldier's last bullet left the rifle with a sound that seemed to tear through the world. The rider charging toward them fell from his horse, and for a heartbeat the canyon went quiet. Smoke drifted through the air, curling around the rocks like restless ghosts. The woman knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his shoulder, where blood seeped through his shirt. "They'll come again," she whispered. He nodded weakly. "I know." From beyond the ridge came the thunder of more hooves. The army was closing in. He could see their silhouettes forming, a line of blue coats shimmering in the heat haze. Between them and the Apache warriors, the two of them stood like figures out of place, caught between worlds that refused to meet. He could no longer tell which side he feared more. "Go," he told her. "You still have a chance to run." She shook her head. "No, if I leave, they'll hunt me. If I stay, they'll kill you." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. "You saved me. Now it's my turn." The horn sounded again, closer this time. The soldiers advanced slowly, rifles raised, their boots crunching over the stones. The Apache scouts had scattered, melting into the canyon's edge, leaving only two figures in the open. The wounded man and the woman who should have been his enemy. He lifted his rifle again, though his strength was fading. "They'll shoot first," he said. "Doesn't matter if I lower this or not." She took a step forward, calling out in her native tongue toward the ridge. Her voice rose and echoed, a cry that sounded part prayer, part warning. The soldiers hesitated. The captain at the front of the line raised his hand. "Identify yourself," he shouted. The soldier recognized that voice. It was the same man who had once commanded him back east, the same man who'd ordered towns burned during the war. He dropped his rifle slowly and called back, "It's me." His voice cracked. "Stand down." For a long moment there was only silence. The wind stirred dust between them. Then the captain rode forward, squinting. "What in God's name are you doing out here with her?" he demanded. "You were supposed to return days ago." The soldier stood straighter despite the pain. "Mission's done." The raid was stopped. The captain's eyes narrowed. "And her?" He glanced at her before answering. "She's no enemy." "She saved my life." The captain laughed coldly. "You expect me to believe that?" He raised his pistol. "Step aside. I'll finish what you couldn't." The woman's hand moved to her knife, but the soldier grabbed her wrist gently. "Don't," he whispered. "If you fight, they'll kill you." She looked up at him, her eyes dark with defiance and sorrow. "If I don't, they'll still kill me." He turned back toward the captain, his jaw tight. "If you want her, you'll have to shoot me first." The man on horseback sneered. "After all this time, you've gone soft." He aimed his pistol, but something in the soldier's gaze made him pause. "You think she's worth dying for?" The soldier didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then one of the younger soldiers stepped forward. "Sir, maybe he's right," he said quietly. "Maybe it's over." The captain glared at him. "You question an order?" But the younger man didn't flinch. "We've been killing long enough." The standoff broke when the sound of more horses echoed from the western ridge. Apache riders appeared, their numbers growing, bows drawn, eyes fixed on the blue coats below. The captain lowered his pistol slightly, realizing the trap. He looked back at the wounded man and spat. "You've brought us all to hell." Before another shot could be fired, thunder cracked overhead, not from guns but from the sky. Rain began to fall in sudden heavy drops, soaking the dust and blood alike. The storm swept through the canyon with violent force, blurring shapes and sounds. The soldier stumbled to his knees, the weight of everything pressing down. The woman caught his arm, steadying him. Around them, both sides hesitated, unsure whether to fight or flee. The rain grew harder, washing the earth clean of footprints and smoke. The captain barked orders to retreat, his men pulling back toward the ridge. The Apache warriors stayed on the high ground, watching, waiting. When the soldiers vanished into the mist, only the two of them remained. He looked up at her, rain running down his face. "It's over," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, for them maybe. For you, not yet." She knelt beside him, pressing her hand against his bleeding shoulder. "You need rest." They found shelter under a ledge where the rain couldn't reach. She built a small fire with trembling hands, using what dry brush she could find. He leaned back against the stone, his strength fading fast. "You could have run," he murmured. "You had your chance." She looked at him and said simply, "I owe you a song." He smiled faintly. "That one you kept humming?" She nodded. "It is for those who lost their way, but still walk." Her voice was soft but clear as she began to sing. The melody rose and fell with the rhythm of the rain, a sound that wrapped around them like warmth. He closed his eyes, letting the words he couldn't understand settle deep in his heart. When the song ended, silence filled the space between them. The storm had passed, leaving only the distant drip of water and the quiet crackle of fire. He opened his eyes again and said, "You told me once it means I remember." She nodded. "Yes, it also means I forgive." He looked into the flames for a long time before speaking. "Then maybe I can too." He took off the army badge from his torn coat and set it on the ground beside the fire. "That life's behind me now." She watched him, her expression unreadable. "What will you do?" He gave a tired smile. "Find a place that doesn't need soldiers. Maybe start again." She tended his wound carefully, binding it with strips from her sleeve. Her hands were gentle, and for the first time in years he didn't flinch from touch. The world outside had grown quiet, the sky painted in pale gold as dawn approached. By morning he could stand again, weak but alive. She led him to the edge of the ridge where the land stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The air smelled clean, new. He turned to her. "Will you go back to your people?" She looked down the valley and then back at him. "I will try. They will not trust easily. But I will tell them not all men with guns are the same." He nodded slowly. "And I'll tell mine that not all wars make heroes." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved gently between them, carrying the scent of wet earth and cedar. She reached out, touching his hand briefly. "You should keep your fire burning," she said softly. "Even when you walk alone." Then she stepped back, her eyes holding his one last time before she turned toward the mountains. He watched her disappear among the trees, her figure small against the rising sun. When she was gone, he looked down at the valley below, the land both had fought and bled on. It felt different now, less cruel, more alive. He took a deep breath, shouldered his rifle, and began to walk east. Each step was slow, steady, and certain. Behind him, the storm clouds drifted away, and the plains opened wide, endless and waiting. He didn't know where the road would lead, only that for the first time since the war, he wasn't running from anything. The ghosts that had followed him for years seemed quieter, fading with each mile. As the sun climbed higher, he stopped once more and looked back. The wind stirred the ashes of old fires and carried away the scent of smoke. Somewhere out there, he imagined her voice still singing that same haunting song. He touched the scar on his shoulder, then whispered to the empty air, "Maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you earn." Then he kept walking, leaving behind the war, the blood and the endless noise of the past. What remained was silence, and in that silence something like forgiveness. The soldier who once lived by orders now lived by choice, carrying with him only the memory of a woman who had taught him that mercy could exist even between enemies. And as the horizon swallowed him, the wind carried his quiet promise across the plains, that no matter how long it took, he would never raise his rifle against another soul again. The land, scarred by too much war, seemed to breathe easier, as if it, too, had been waiting for this kind of peace. The last echo of hoofbeats faded, and the desert fell still, holding only the sound of the wind and the faint trace of her song, both reminders that even in the hardest hearts, the will to forgive could outlast any battle.